This should have said MPS Meetup 2023 until now, right? So this is the MPS Meetup, not the LIonWeb Initiative, only now it's the LIonWeb Initiative. So let's see how this works. It does work. Okay, so as we all know, everybody wants everything to be on the web. And the web is a much more federated, distributed, open environment than classical desktop tools like MPS are. And so there is clearly a need to integrate different modeling tool components on the web. And that's what the LIonWeb initiative is all about. LIonWeb stands for Language Interfaces on the Web. All right, so nothing to do with animals. And so as it says, we want to create an ecosystem of interoperable components for building language-oriented modeling tools on the web. By language-oriented, we mean we are not trying to standardize or build UML tools. I mean, you know the story. It's kind of, you know, open, distributed, MPS-like on the web. If we look at the activities that we are working on, then the main focus is the definition of a bunch of protocols, right? To be able to, for example, connect editors to repositories. I'll get back to that in a moment. So the definition of the protocols is the main activity of this group here. Talk about the group towards the end, who the people are. If you want to define protocols, you have to also define what the various, if you will, system components are, like protocol between whom. So that's why we're also defining what we call, this is actually lasering? No. Ah, wow, this is fancy. So we also define a meta model and a reference architecture, right? So a reference architecture defines the various components that the protocols connect, and meta model is, of course, the usual stuff, concepts, properties, and shit, like basically in MPS and everywhere else. Second priority is that we're also defining programming language level APIs, basically bindings. How do you access models once you receive them from through a LIonWeb protocol? Although this is clearly a second priority. We are actually quite busy defining the protocols. So the programming language level stuff definitely plays second fiddle, but you know, we have to build these APIs anyway to be able to test things. So why not at least put them in some kind of repository as an example implementation of how you would do it. And third, the idea of LIonWeb is also to serve as a collaboration hub for hopefully a growing community around tool builders, tool adapters, tool integrators based on these protocols. And of course, you know, zooming out progressively further, you know, educate the world about why this kind of approach to development and language-oriented modeling is great and will save the world from the AI apocalypse or whatever. So here is this reference architecture that I mentioned. It's totally unsurprising, I guess, but I guess it still needs to be said how these systems work. There's a repository. No, I can't leave here, right? I have to stay here. So okay, so let's try this. Okay, so here is a repository that stores models. Models are, as you know, graphs. I mean, there's absolutely nothing surprising here, right? It's the usual notion of model that MPS also has and EMF has and everybody else has. Then there's a bunch of editors that allow users to edit these models. And then there are so-called model processors, which are basically, if you will, background processes that look at the models that are being edited by users and, for example, calculate types or scopes or other derived information. You might ask yourself, why the heck is this guy talking at the MPS meetup when he hasn't used the word MPS yet? I will, because, of course, one of these things that integrate with and connect to this stuff is MPS. There is already an MPS binding, and we're continuing to work on this. So in some sense, LIonWeb is also, one goal is also to bring MPS to the web in some shape or form, right? There's lots of details to discuss here, of course. So talking about details, we define or want to define two main protocols. One we call bulk access. It's like basically some kind of REST-like API where you ask for a particular part of the overall repository content. You get the model, you do stuff with it, for example, edit, and then save it back, or you get it and, I don't know, generate some code from it, some text, whatever, doesn't matter. Or you generate some other model and save that back to the repository. The point is it's bulk, right? You get the whole thing, you do stuff, you send it back. The other one is what we call Delta access. We probably want to change the name at some point. There is also obviously a connection to interactive Google Docs style collaboration, which is maybe the same or maybe isn't. But the point is that you get a model and then you edit it. And while you edit it, you save incrementally the changes back to the repository. And when the model and the repository changes, you get notified, so you can update your stuff, right? So this is the, non-bulk approach to editing models. And there's also one more thing to say about the models in the repository. We distinguish between primary and secondary, or I always say that because it's so obvious, right? Call them derived models, not secondary. Primary models are those that are edited by the users, the ASTs, right? What MPS you do in the editor. And then the derived models are those produced by those processors. So the core idea is that you edit the model, some kind of processor produces type system information, stores that type system information back into the repository, and if an editor is interested in the type system, well, they just subscribe to that through this Delta protocol and get notified when types change, right? So we want to make the, if you will, distribution and transport of the stuff the user edits based on the same protocols as the stuff that the system computes and you as an editor or something consume, right? We want to do this in the same way. Everything is models. And again, we distinguish just in terms of role they play between primary and derived. All right, so work products. Obviously, the main goal is specifications. So we're gonna, when we grow up, we're gonna be like the OMG. Joke, we won't, because we said we want to first get stuff to run and then document it as a protocol, right? So it's not gonna be just paper. It's also that of everybody who participates here, nobody actually wants to write stuff, so we prefer to code. So you might get example implementations before there is a specification, perhaps. Second is, again, this reference architecture is also, if you will, a kind of work product. It's a very simple one. It's kind of already done. Then these bindings for the protocols, they are work products in the sense that they will be available from the repository, but the way we decided to kind of mention this is to say, well, these are basically example implementations. We're not building production-ready repositories or even model APIs, right? That's the idea, that the community does that or that existing tools do that. For example, ModelX already has a repository, right? We're not going to rebuild that. Crazy. So whatever code we publish is intended as getting you started examples, or just copy it and make it robust, as everybody does everywhere. Yeah, that's what I just said. So here's the current set of participants. Not going to read everybody. You might know many of the names from the MPS community. That's of course not a coincidence, because the whole initiative started mainly from the usual kind of suspects in the MPS universe. And the big announcement for today is that we are now open for additional participants. I'll get back to that at the end of the talk when I kind of summarize stuff, because now I'm going to hand over to Niko for a live demo. Here's well, you don't need a clicker, you have to actually do stuff. Yeah, okay.
Yes, I need to switch this on.
And I switch myself off.
Okay.
Or the microphone.
So, for me, this is the demo, and as we said, we like running code. And the idea is we want to integrate. And the things we want to integrate, of course, I didn't open the right file. We built a very simple example. We have this great property language, nothing surprising here. And you can actually also see the three components we will integrate. Star Lasso by Federico over there. MPS you might have heard of. And I will embarrass myself. Freun, the editor with the name which is only pronounceable by Meinte and developed by Jos. And as we want to show interfaces, we want to have a lot of components. So the idea is we use Star Lasso to parse this, convert it into LIonWeb model and also used star lasso to create a LIonWeb Metamodel. Import this into MPS and then use Völter to access it in MPS, change it, and write it back. So the first thing we do, we use some very readable, to find the right one. Yeah, this is not very interesting, but what this creates, it parses this and creates the LIonWeb representation of the same thing. You don't really need to read this, but if we find somewhere in here, we find the text we just saw, right? And if you look a bit, you see this thing is a property which is defined in some language. That's actually the language which has an ID. So again, nothing of this is really surprising, which is the idea. We don't want to do extremely innovative stuff. We want to be a solid base that can be reused. So once we have this, and we want to import it in MPS, MPS needs languages, right? Otherwise you cannot create instances. And then star lasso has a very smart way to create metamodels out of Kotlin classes. That's what this thing does. And the relevant part is here. We created a LIonWeb Metamodel now. And this one we can, in MPS, we import this. Here you see the combined, the file again. And then I will run my intention, which gives some output here. And then we actually imported 2 metamodels. This is the properties language we just talked about. Yeah, as I said, this is not very, is exactly as you would expect it. We have a root node, the properties file, which contains a bunch of properties which have a value. Value is abstract, or should be. And then we have Boolean values and decimal values. So this is really not very interesting. And the second language is the built-in language of star lasso. We need this because you actually saw here all of this extends AST node. But this one, as you see, this is from MPS point of view, this is just a model at the moment. But to create instances of it, we need MPS languages, which brings us to the second step, which converts the LIonWeb language to an MPS language. I just need to refresh the references. And then I run my converter and hopefully, yay. So we now have 2 languages here. And they are exactly as you would expect them, right? You have the properties file, which contains properties. So it's exactly the same structure, just in MPS. We want to create instances of it, so we need to build our 2 languages. Which takes a second. So now we have built them. Let me close a few. Nobody wants to migrate anything. And so now we can import the instance, right? What we actually want to see, we want to have this property file, which is here. I will get to the errors in a minute, but you see here, there is our great text. And then if you now look at the errors, of course, we have not imported the properties language, so let's do that. We could not, we just created it. Now we have one more error. If MPS updates its type system, so it cannot be root, the error message reads. So of course, because LIonWeb, as of now, has no notion of a root concept, that's something specific to MPS. So let's fix that. We want this to be true and rebuild our language. That was, yeah. And now this can be root and our error goes away. And now I will actually do one thing to simplify my next step. I move this example to a different model. This is just that yeah, thank you. I always fall in this trap. So I just moved it here because what we want to do now, we want to open this in Fröhn. Localhost, and we have a lot of them. And I didn't start for you. So, to bridge this, if there are already questions, Markus is happy to answer them.
Are there questions? You have to continue the demo, no questions.
Yeah, then you need to look at me how I try to get this running in while everybody stares at me.
Looks really cool. You you said several times that you don't try to be like crazy innovative or anything, but build a robust foundation. But I anticipate that there's still some hard problems to solve at the moment. So I'd be curious to see what are the most challenging things that you're looking at right now.
Agreeing. No, seriously. We had a hour's worth of discussions around whether our meta model should support multiple inheritance from concepts or multiple interface inheritance, but then what's the difference between an interface and an abstract concept, and do we need both, and should we support everything or only the minimal set, and so on. And this is surprisingly hard and takes a lot of time. Actually, yesterday we kind of decided to bail out just to decide something. We kind of more or less literally threw a coin because we don't have criteria right now to make a decision. And it's not that we can't agree because of different interests and political shit. Some of these things are genuinely hard. Like how do you identify a node? What's a node ID? Is it just numbers? But then Federico says, I want to put information from my parsing stuff kind of in the node ID, so I need it to be a string. But then if it's a string with characters, then it doesn't fit with MPS and so on and so on. So it's tough. Can I stop talking?
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, so sorry for that. This is Fröhn, projectional editor in the web. If you want to know more, ask the inventor, Jos. And now we want to we want to load a model here, right? You can here you select the model, open it, and yeah, this is the model you've seen. Again, not very surprising. And we can of course edit it. And we can now try the stuff which mostly works. Let's see. We can create a new property, and it should be an int value, whatever. And so actually just to see that this is really a projectional editor, this thing supports different projections, right? So again, we have the same thing. And we can save it back. So if I save the current unit, yay, it worked. Let's look at MPS. So we have in Munich, and we have our new value. And we want to round trip, right? We want to go back to our parser. So in the end, we want to export this thing again. I need to update my reference again, which let's create the reference again. Properties file in the instance, just to see that I have the right one. Yes. So, and now we see we exported into this file here. So let's run the exporter. Look at our messages, how red they are. No? Looks okay. So we now have this file, and somewhere in here, we find our strange int value, and somewhere else we find our, so probably search for Munich. So we find it here. And then we are back at star lasso, which can unparse this thing. If I find the right parse code gen, which is obviously the same as unparse. That's when I try stuff that I haven't the experimental part. So let's see if I can fix that. Let's delete this property and try the export again.
And then show the original file and claim it has worked.
It's removed here, right? You see it. Here's the last one. Let's see if it works now. No. Okay. Sorry for that. Probably I messed something up because actually this part I did try. Anyway, I guess you believe me that we can unparse this thing. So any questions for the demo? As you can see, it's obviously this is not production code. This is it works, as you can see. It's not just proof of concept, so this can be developed into something that you can use for real. Obviously, we are not there yet. Any questions on this, on the demo? Otherwise, I would hand back.
Do you plan to make the unparsing part also an automated process? So I change something in a projectional editor and it's immediately like reflected in the textual editor?
Once we have the Delta protocol, that would be the idea, right? If you want this. Actually, for an unparser, I'm not sure how useful this is, because often then you would need the next step, which automatically picks up the change in the unparsed file and does something with it. So technically, there's no reason not to.
Thanks.
If you have a use case for it. Good. Then let's head back to the presentation.
Okay, so where's the clicker? Click. That was what you just saw. So where are we? We have the bulk read and write protocols more or less specified. There are a few details open. I mean, for example, how the meta model looks exactly with this inheritance stuff, but it kind of works, and that's what we've seen in the demo. There is all kinds of existing integrations. Oh, I shouldn't move. Sorry. There's all kinds of existing integrations. There is APIs in TypeScript, so you can load models from TypeScript and modify them. There is one for Java/Kotlin. There is something being developed in C#, which at this point isn't open source, but hope to convince the customer to not care. There is the integration with MPS, as we've seen, the integration with Freon. There is an integration, at least prototypical, and at least until ModelX apparently changed internal APIs, one with ModelX. There is the stuff that we just saw with StarLazu, and there is an early integration with EMF. So none of this is production code, none of this is done. But as you can see, there is a bunch of activities to really make this an integration layer, which is exactly the purpose. And I guess the fact that we have, whatever this is, 8 different tools, at least in the process of being integrated, kind of demonstrates that we are at least on a path to getting there. So near-term focus, next steps, finalize the bulk protocol and the necessary decisions in the meta model, and then document them. We have a whole bunch of issues in the issue tracker that says document this, document that, document this, and the other thing. And the idea is that people pick these up and actually document stuff. That's an experiment in self-motivation, I guess. We then want to soon work on these Delta protocol/collaboration. There is a bit of discussion whether it makes sense if you really want to do, for example, collaboration based on operational transform, as ModelX, for example, supports, whether it makes sense to define this as a protocol, like on the wire data formats, versus implementing something as libraries, because there's quite a bit of algorithmic stuff going on there. And this, for example, an open issue where we're not 100% sure whether the focus on protocols versus on running code is the right thing, right? So we're not going to dogmatically stick to this only protocols, no code, but at least that's the starting point for our kind of worldview. Yeah, we want to finally kind of nail down the open questions regarding the meta model, improve the reference implementations, and then, of course, support the integration with more tools. We really want, well, integration only works if as many people as possible use this for their tools, right? So that's why we are really interested in you guys joining in some shape or form. It's basically 2 ways. One, you can, so back button, yes, you can kind of become part of this kind of core group that meets weekly, and you can join and do all the documentation, for example, does all this kind of core work, right? That's one way we don't want to grow this to 100 people, right? We don't want to become OMG. We joked about we have to define subgroups and subcommittees, which kind of is a joke, but maybe also isn't, right? We'll see. So if you're interested in actively working on this, what did we say? Talk to one of us, right? Or send us an email at info@LIonWeb.io. We just initiated or created the email. We hope it works. And apart from that, we also created a Slack workspace for general discussions around it. Like if you don't want to be part of the core group, but actually quote just use it or integrate some kind of tool, then join our Slack. You can ask questions. You can shout at us if we don't document things well enough. Here is the Slack link. The QR code does the same thing. And this brings me to the end of the presentation. If you have questions, we have a few more minutes. No questions? Come on.
We can motivate. You get a mouse pad here.
Wow. Anybody need a mouse pad? Ask a fake question.
You even get,
no? Okay, well.
You even get MPS shortcuts on it?
Good. Wait, the mouse pad.
Oh, it saves my life.
I forgot the question.
Yeah, no, I remember the question. I noticed that on your list of things done, the delta part seemed to be missing. Is it?
Yeah.
Is that that's the fact at the moment?
Yes, it's not done yet because we wanted to start with a simpler one, which is obviously the bulk stuff, and so we don't want to have too much, open work items and finish nothing. So we really said, let's finish the bulk stuff, which is useful, right, for many use cases, and then address the delta/collaboration thing.
Yeah, because that part has some interesting edge conditions that, if two people updating the model at the same time, how do you do that?
I mean, yeah, but these problems are,
they're classically solved.
They're solvable.
Still.
They are solved, for example, in ModelX. They are solved in MPS, Web MPS, right? There are libraries that can do this. But again, yes, it's harder. That's why we haven't done it yet. Best practice, right? Move the hard part out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
5, 4, 3.
Maybe a generic question. Just will the slides be
Just a generic question.
Yes.
Will the slides be available after the talk?
I assume all slides will be available somehow through the Meetup website, Oscar, right?
Okay, perfect.
And since we're talking about generic stuff, I'll take a couple of pictures during the Meetup. I appointed myself to be the official photographer. If you don't want to be photographed, that's bad, right? I will probably still take pictures, but if you really don't want them to be like anywhere published, not even internally to this group, then send me an email and we'll figure out a way how to delete those pictures. Okay? All right. Yes.
Markus, what would be the first application for this? Some kind of convincing industrial application.
Well, I can give you one example. I'm working with a customer who work in C# and need all this modeling stuff to work, but also need things in the browser. So we're gonna /have implemented these bulk protocols in C#. So we can serialize stuff from our quote repository, and then I use the existing LIonWeb things TypeScript-wise to get things running in the browser, to get the models into the browser, for example, right? Classical interop stuff.
Yeah, and we both still work on it with another customer who, essentially the same story. They want a repository, they want collaborative editing. So the repository will probably be ModelX, let's see. But they want also the web stuff. And then you need some way of communicating anyway. And then we want to use this one for it.
Are topics like language evolution and models migration and this kind of stuff?
It's clearly on the radar. We all know how painful it is if it's not supported by the infrastructure. Yes, exactly. That's the generic answer. It's a version tag. But no. I mean, it's not something we want to do at the very beginning because it will make. I mean, You know how it is, right? We'll never finish if we solve every challenge in the beginning, but it's clearly on the radar, and we'll definitely address that. The question there is a little bit, how much is actually really a protocol thing versus how much is a problem of, for example, a repository that needs to run these migrations, for example, right? So whenever we discuss this topic, we kind of find out that there's not that much to do on the protocol level, kind of jokingly except the version tag, but it's on the radar. All right, time out, I guess. Oh, you have to ask more questions. I mean, let's finish if there are no more questions. We're done.